Good evening and thanks so much for joining us. I'm Christy McDonald. Tonight, MiWeek is coming to you from the Weston Book Cadillac in Detroit, the site of the Business Leaders for Michigan CEO Summit. We will sit down with some of the CEOs participating and talk a little bit about Michigan's future in a global marketplace. Plus, a decision in Detroit's bankruptcy, but when will the plan take effect? And that is where we're going to start tonight. Judge Rhodes approved the city's plan of adjustment and said what happened in Detroit must never happen again. And while the plan has been approved, the date it will take effect remains unclear. There will be another court hearing on November 24th. So what happens next? Here to weigh in on that, Nolan Finley, the editorial page editor of the Detroit News, and Nancy Caffer joins us today from the Detroit Free Press, sitting in for Stephen Henderson. Nolan, Nancy, it's good to see you. So this is our first show since the decision, the plan of adjustment that was made last week. It feels that this should be the time that we sit and take a sigh of relief, but knowing that there is tremendous work ahead.
Well, and I guess that's the theme. Everybody was really excited that this bankruptcy was able to end so quickly, so cleanly, no appeals. No further litigation, we hope. But now the challenge is making it work. The ground is there for it. So the foundation is there. There's a lot of extra money freed up by this bankruptcy to improve city services and to improve quality of life. But the basic challenges remain. How do you hang on to your residents? How do you increase your revenue stream? And how do you operate in an efficient, transparent manner at City Hall?
You know, Nancy, I mean, before we tackle a lot of those questions about what Detroit has to do now and where we're going to go next, I think it's important to kind of take a step back and say, do you think that we'll ever see a municipal bankruptcy like what happened in Detroit again around the country?
Lord, I hope not. I think it's a measure of how municipal bankruptcy can go that we look at this and say this was a clean, fast process, because it was. It was, compared to other municipal bankruptcies, it was incredibly fast. We were at one time very worried pensioners who took some real substantive painful cuts were going to be significantly more harmed than they were in this bankruptcy. They came out much better than I think that we thought that they would. But yeah, this is a really painful process, and yeah, I really hope that it doesn't happen again.
It's interesting. I think you have to balance tone of reaction almost to this decision. It's not jubilation or really celebration, but it's more like, okay, we've gotten through this process now, and now the hard work begins. Nolan, what would you say are the top three things that Detroit now and the leadership now has to do?
Has to become a livable city. You can't lose any more residents. We have to be at the bottom of that population decline that began 50, 60 years ago. We now have to start growing population again. You have to start growing your business base again. You've got to get revenue coming into this city, tax revenue. Otherwise, 10 years from now, that the money that's been freed up by this bankruptcy, by erasing the debt, that's going to be gone, and Detroit's going to have similar challenges paying its bills.
It's easier said than done, Nancy, when you talk about growing a population and then growing a tax base. Can Detroit settle for holding right now in population?
We're going to keep losing population for a while. We're currently losing about 600 residents a month, and no one really expects that to stop for the next, I don't know exactly how long, several years. Like, we're going to eventually predict it to level out around, I think the last SIMCOG report was that we're about 680,000 residents. I think we're expected to level off around 550, somewhere in the 500,000s. But I mean, Nolan's right, we can't afford to lose more residents, but we're going to. Couple of things that have to change. DPS has to get fixed. Detroit Public Schools are in a terrible state. The State Education Achievement Authority, the statewide reform district, hasn't really had the results that folks hoped it would have yet. It's still kind of early for them. There's still the possibility that they could do some better results for the lowest performing academic schools that they're now running. We've got charters, which have once again not really had the academic achievement in the city that we hope that they would across the board. Though some schools are very good and doing great work. All this has to get fixed, or else the new residents that we're seeing coming to Midtown and downtown are going to leave. Anyone who can't afford to send their kid to a private school, and private school space is not plentiful in the city. There's some really good options. There's not tons of great options though. Or get a seat in a high performing charter. Folks are going to leave once they get to the age of having kids. That has to get fixed. And I don't think anybody really has a fully developed plan for how to make that happen.
You know, Nolan, I think schools are definitely on the list, but it feels like they're far down the list in terms of, well, we've got to make sure that we got our IT system in place so we can collect the taxes that we have.
And they have been, and they weren't part of this bankruptcy at all, weren't part of the discussion at all. But they remain.
Was that wrong? Do you think that it should have been a bigger part of the discussion?
I mean, they weren't germane to the bankruptcy in terms of the financial demands, but they certainly are in terms of rebuilding a city, and nobody seems to have the answer, so nobody wants to touch it. It's a tar baby nobody wants to pick up because nobody has an answer here. And you know, there's been pressure or been some suggestion that, okay, we turn it over to Mayor Duggan and let him do it. Well, I remember when there was pressure to turn it over to Kwame Kilpatrick and let him do it. And you wonder how that would have worked out.
So there's been a plan that's been floated that would centralize all the schools, enrollment and accountability for all the Detroit schools, public schools, traditional public schools, charters, and the EAA under a central authority. One of the theories out there is that Duggan would would have oversight over that authority. That's an interesting idea, and it gets us part of where we need to go in terms of coordinating transportation, enrollment, and accountability, but it does nothing to affect the budget problem in DPS. They're supposed to have there's $127 million shortfall or deficit in the last year. They've got operating budget shortfall. They've got serious financial problems. They've got a ton of debt, and absent some big influx of cash, like great, more accountability, awesome. But how do you deal with a serious budget that prevents you from providing the kind of services that you need to kids? There's some ideas going on here. The emergency manager in charge of DPS right now, Jack Martin, his contract is set to expire in January, and we're going to see some kind of legislative move. Probably not any big thing in lame duck, but sometime in the spring, in January, we're going to have to see something, whether it's the appointment of another EM. I don't get the sense that anyone's really eager to appoint another EM, or the creation of some kind of new mechanism to oversee DPS, because I don't think anyone thinks they're done with their financial emergency.
The oversight has to be removed from the Detroit political process, or you're never going to improve the Detroit schools. I mean, you can say, well, Duggan would be a good guy to do it. Well, maybe he would, maybe he wouldn't, but he's not going to be mayor forever. And this fix, whatever fix you put in place, has to last. These schools have changed governance and models half a dozen times in the last 20 years. They've been in and out of state control and what have you. But you can't mire it in the Detroit political process, or you're going to have the equivalent of the old school board, and meaningful educational reform will just stall.
All right, we're going to have to leave it right there. Nancy Kaffer from the Detroit Free Press, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it.